Wealth Comes Easily presents How the Mind Works by Christian D. Larson. Chapter 4, The Leading Metaphysical Law. Whatever enters the consciousness of man will express itself in the personality of man. This is one of the most important of all the laws of life, and when its immense scope is fully comprehended, thousands of perplexing questions will be answered. We shall then know why we are as we are and why all things about us are as they are, and we shall also know how all this can be changed. When we examine the principle upon which this law is based, we find that our environments are the results of our actions and our actions are the results of our thoughts. Our physical and mental conditions are the results of our states of mind and our states of mind are the results of our ideas. Our thoughts are mental creations patterned after the impressions that exist in consciousness, and our ideas are the mental conceptions that come from our conscious understanding of life. Thus, we realize that everything existing both in the mental field and in the personality, as well as in surrounding conditions, have their origin in that which becomes active in human consciousness. We may define consciousness by stating that it is an attribute of the ego through which the individual knows what is and what is taking place. Consciousness may usually be divided into three phases: the objective, the subjective and the absolute. Through absolute consciousness, the ego discerns its relationship with the universal, that phase of consciousness that is beyond the average mind and need not necessarily be considered in connection with this law. Through subjective consciousness, the ego knows what is taking place within itself, that is, within the vast field of individuality. And through objective consciousness, the ego knows what is taking place in its immediate external world. Objective consciousness employs the five external senses, while subjective consciousness employs all those finer perceptions which, when grouped together, are sometimes spoken of as the sixth sense. In our study of this law, we shall deal principally with subjective consciousness because it is this consciousness that rules over real interior action. The subjective plane is the plane of change and growth, so that there can be no change in any part of life until the cause of the desired change has been found or produced in the subjective. What enters objective consciousness will not produce any effect upon the personality unless it also enters subjective consciousness, because it is only what becomes subjective that reproduces itself in the human entity. In our present state of existence, the center of conscious action is largely in the subconscious mind, that is, the interior finer mental field, and in consequence all the actions of consciousness are directly connected with the subjective. In this connection, it is well to state that the terms subjective and subconscious mean practically the same. Whatever enters consciousness and is deeply felt will impress itself upon the subjective, so therefore in order to control the results of this law we must avoid giving deep feelings to such impressions, thoughts, ideas or desires as we do not wish to have reproduced in ourselves. There are many impressions and experiences that enter objective consciousness to a degree, but never become subjective since they are not accompanied with depth of feeling. We may be conscious of such experiences or impressions, but we are not affected by them. For this reason, we need not give them our attention, which is well because the majority of the impressions that enter the conscious mind pass off, so to speak, without affecting life in any way. Whatever actually enters consciousness is always felt by the finer sensibilities of mind, and whatever enters into the finer state of mind is taken up by the creative energies, and impressions are accordingly produced. From these impressions will come similar expressions, and it is such expressions that determine thought, character, conduct and life. To state this law in a slightly different manner, we may state that whatever enters subjective consciousness will produce an impression just like itself, and every subjective impression becomes a pattern for thought creation while it lasts. Therefore, whenever an impression is formed in the mind, thoughts will be created just like that impression. And so long as that impression remains in subjective consciousness, thought will continue to be formed after its likeness. Then we must remember that every thought created in the mind goes out into the personality, producing vital and chemical effects according to its nature. Thus, we understand the process of the law. First, the impression is formed upon subjective consciousness. Second, the creative energies of the mind will produce thoughts and mental states just like those impressions, and all such thoughts and mental states will express themselves in the personality, producing conditions in the personality similar to their own nature. To illustrate this process from everyday life, we may mention several experiences with which we are all familiar. When you view a very peaceful scene and become wholly absorbed in it, your entire being will become perfectly serene almost at once, and this is the reason. The scene was peaceful and produced a peaceful impression upon your mind. This impression entered your subjective consciousness because you became deeply absorbed in the scene. If you had simply viewed the scene in a superficial way, you would have felt no change because then the impression would not have entered your subjective mind, but you responded to the impressions that entered the mind through the organ of sight and thus admitted those impressions into the deeper or subjective state. In other words, the scene actually entered into your consciousness, the serenity of it all was impressed upon the subjective, and as explained in the process above, the creative energies of your mind at once began to create thoughts and mental states containing the same serene and peaceful life. These thoughts entered into your entire personality, as all thoughts do after being created, thus conveying the life of peace to every atom in your being. When you view an exciting scene and are carried away by it, you lose your poise and may even become uncontrollable. The reason is you admit confusion into your mind, and according to the law, confusion will be produced in yourself, That is, discord has entered your consciousness and has become the model for the creative processes of the mind. The mental energies will enter such states and create thoughts and mental states that are just as confused as the confusion you saw in the without. And when these confused states go out into the personality, as they do almost at once, your entire nervous system will be upset, disturbed and in a state of inharmony. Thus, you have produced the same confusion in your own mind and body that you saw in your environments. However, if you had prevented the confused scenes from entering your mind, you would have been perfectly calm in the midst of it all. But by permitting the excitement to enter your consciousness, it was reproduced in yourself, and the discord that entered your consciousness from the without was thereby expressed in your own personality. There may be indications of threatening failure in your work, and you may begin to fear that such failure will come, but so long as you do not feel the inner dread of failure, the impression of failure will not enter your consciousness, and accordingly conditions of failure will not be produced in your own mind. But if the fear continues until you actually feel fearful deep down in your heart, the idea of failure has entered your consciousness, and if not prevented will be deeply impressed in the subjective. When failure is impressed upon your subjective mind, a condition of mental failure will permeate all your faculties, and in consequence they will fail to do their best. And we all know very well that the very moment our faculties begin to go back on us, doing less work and less effective work, we are on the downgrade to failure and loss. Failure means going down to the lesser, and if you have admitted thoughts of failure into your mind, you have given your creative energies bad models. These energies will create thoughts and mental states just like those models, no matter what those models may be. If those models are based upon the idea of failure, all the thoughts created will contain the failing attitude, or the losing ground attitude. When such thoughts express themselves in the system, they will produce weakening conditions and disturbances everywhere in mind and personality. Your faculties will not be able to do their best, they will begin to fail in their work because they are being permeated with a losing ground tendency, and you will make many mistakes on account of the increasing confusion. The result will be inevitable failure unless you are able to check this tendency or retrace your steps upward before it is too late. We have all noticed that the man on the downgrade makes more mistakes than anyone else, and also that his genius or his talents become weaker the further down he goes. The above explains the reason why. We are all familiar with the folly of judging from appearances and permitting temporary conditions to impress and govern our thinking, the reason being that our object is not to follow the whims of circumstances or the uncertainties of fate, but to carry out our purpose in life regardless of what happens. On the other hand, when we do not judge according to external indications, but proceed to impress the subconscious mind with a determination to succeed, we are placing in consciousness an idea that stands for growth, advancement and increase. Immediately the creative energies of mind will proceed to create thoughts and states that have advancing, upbuilding and constructive tendencies. Such thoughts will give push, power, life and added talent to your faculties, and you will very soon begin to do better work. The superior forces will build up your mind, make your mind more brilliant, and add constantly to your capacity. Thus, you'll become a success within yourself, that is, your own forces and faculties will begin to work successfully, which is the first essential to the gaining of success in the external world. You will be moving forward in your own being and you will be gaining in worth in every respect. The results will be better work, better impressions upon the world, and fewer mistakes. And when the world discovers that there is success in you, they will want your service with recompense according to your full worth. When we understand this process of the mind, we realize how we can bring upon ourselves almost anything simply through permitting the corresponding impressions to enter consciousness. Therefore, we should learn to prevent all such things from entering consciousness as we do not wish to see reproduced in ourselves and expressed through our personality. Then we should learn to impress permanently in consciousness the image and likeness of all those things that we do wish to develop and express. The workings of this law are very well illustrated in conditions of health and disease, because when we are constantly thinking about disease and fearing disease, we permit the idea of disease to impress itself upon consciousness. In other words, we become more and more conscious of disease, and cause the image of sickness to get a firm foothold in the subjective. The result is that the creative forces of mind will create thoughts, mental states and conditions just like the image of disease, and that which is just like the image of disease actually is a disease. Therefore, since every mental state conveys conditions similar to itself to every part of the body, such thoughts will constantly carry diseased conditions into the body, tending thereby to produce the very ailment that we feared, thought of, or impressed upon consciousness in the first place. Nature may resist these adverse conditions for a while if the body is full of vitality, but when the vital forces run low, these sickly mental conditions will have full sway, and the result will be a siege of illness which may be prolonged, and even result in death, which happens thousands of times under just such conditions. The law, however, works both ways. We can just as easily impress the idea of perfect health upon subjective consciousness and thus give the creative forces a better image as a model for their creative processes. At such times all thoughts and mental states will be wholesome and health-producing, and will constantly carry better health, more harmony and greater strength to the body. This is how the law works, and as anyone can understand the process, further details are not required. Briefly stated, the law is this: that everything entering subjective consciousness will impress itself there and become a pattern for the creative energies of the mind. These energies will proceed to create thoughts and conditions just like the impression formed, which will carry their own conditions to every part of the human system. In this way conditions are produced and expressed in the personality just like the original idea, thought or impression that entered subjective consciousness. Everything that enters the mind through the various senses may also enter subjective consciousness, that is, if deeply felt, and thus produce a permanent impression. In like manner, all our own concepts of things will become impressions, that is, if they are inner convictions. For this reason, we must not only watch all those things that enter the mind through the senses, but we must also govern our own thinking so that every mental conception formed will be one of quality, worth, wholeness, health, growth and advancement. To employ this law properly, nothing must be permitted to enter the subjective unless we wish to have it reproduced in ourselves. We should refuse therefore to take into consciousness that which we do not wish to see expressed through mind or body. We should train consciousness to respond only to those external impressions that are desirable, and we should train our own imaging faculties to impress deeply and permanently in consciousness every good thing or desirable quality that we wish to see reproduced in ourselves and expressed through our personality. Chapter 5: How the Mind Makes the Man. Man gradually grows into the likeness of that which he thinks of the most. This is another important metaphysical law and is so closely related to the law presented in the preceding chapter that the analysis given for one will naturally explain the process of the other. However, this second law is distinct from the first one in many of its phases, and it is so full of possibility that the understanding of its application opens up a vast world of change and attainment along a number of lines. Man is the reflection of all his thought, that is, his body, his character, his mind, his spiritual nature. All are fashioned according to his thought. Even the elements that compose the flesh of his body are gross or fine just as his thought happens to be. Whenever we think a great deal of the material, most of our thoughts will become material in their nature and will carry material conditions to every part of the system. This explains why gross thoughts stamp grossness upon every fiber of the body, while refined thought refines every fiber, improving the quality and perfecting the structure. The mind that thinks a great deal of the perfection of the Supreme will think a great deal of divine qualities and spiritual attainments. In brief, nearly all the thought created in such a mind will be of a superior nature and will carry superiority to every part of the system. When we think more of the spiritual than we do of other things, the entire system will constantly pass through a refining and spiritualizing process, the possibility of which if carried on to the ultimate would be nothing less than marvelous. When we think a great deal of power, ability and attainment, we are actually creating a great deal of ability in us. We are increasing our power and we are moving forward into far greater attainments. The mind that thinks constantly of perfect health, refusing to entertain for a moment the thought of disease, is steadily growing into a state of health that will ere long be absolutely perfect. Such a person may be suffering from a score of maladies now, but all of them must pass away before the constant influx of health, wholeness and life. All darkness must finally vanish from a place that is constantly being filled with more and more light. In like manner, any condition that may exist in the person of man will have to change and improve if the person is constantly being filled with a superior condition. We become like the thoughts we think because the creative power of thought is the only creative power that we have within us. And the energies of mind are constantly creating, and what they create now is just like the thoughts we think now. Since every physical condition, every mental state, and every phase of character, since all these things are fashioned after our predominating thoughts, and since the capacity of every faculty and the quality of every talent are determined by the thoughts we think, we must naturally conclude that there can be no greater art than the art of correct thinking. In fact, to think is to occupy a position involving far greater responsibility than that of 1,000 absolute monarchs. And when we realize this, we will not permit a single thought to take shape and form in our minds without first determining upon the value of that thought. Why we grow into the likeness of that of which we think the most has been fully explained in the preceding chapter, and it is found in the fact that every impression formed in the mind will reproduce its kind and express its creations throughout the entire system. And though these impressions usually come from without in the first place, still they do not become real impressions until we accept them into our consciousness, or in thought, or in conviction. That is, many minds will think only what is suggested to them by environment, or what they are told to think by those in authority. Still, it is their own thought that shapes their lives. Wherever the suggestion may come from, it is your thought about that suggestion that produces the effect. The analysis of thought presented in the preceding chapter explains how the person is affected by thought, and how thought is always created in the likeness of those ideas, states or impressions that have established themselves in consciousness. But to carry this analysis to its final goal, we must discover why man becomes like his thought and also how he can think thought of a superior nature. And this we discover through the workings of the law now under consideration. In the first place, man becomes like his thought because there is no other pattern in his being besides his own thought. The creative forces of his mind and personality always create according to the image and likeness of the strongest and deepest impressions in consciousness, and all such impressions are produced by the process of thinking. When we use the term thought, however, we may refer either to the mental model, which is the result of mental conception, or we may refer to that thought which is the result of mental creation. The mental creation is patterned after the mental conception, and the mental conception is the result of our efforts to understand what we are thinking about. Mental conception is conscious and is therefore under our control, while mental creation is subconscious and is therefore beyond our control, but we do not have to control mental creation. Those creations will be just like our mental conceptions, therefore, when we form only such mental conceptions as we like, we shall have only such mental creations as we like. In consequence, when we see mentally that which is superior and can form a true conception of what we see, we give to the creative energies a model that is higher than any we have given them before. Accordingly, the mental creations will be superior. And here we should remember that these creations are not wholly abstract but are in most instances as concrete or tangible as the body itself. The creative energies of the human system act both in the mind and in the body, though their central field of action is always in the subjective or inner side of things. In the body these energies constitute the vital forces and the nerve forces of the system, while in the mind they constitute all those energies or powers employed in thought, feeling or mental action of whatever nature. When we examine these energies, we find that they do not simply create conditions after the likeness of the predominating thought, but that they themselves also become just like the predominating thought, which fact illustrates the power exercised by such thoughts as hold the ruling position in our minds. From this fact we conclude that these forces will give vitality to the body that corresponds to the states of the mind. So, that if there is anything wrong in the subjective states of the mind, these forces will convey those wrong conditions to the body, the reason being that these forces come from the subjective and cannot be different from the ruling conditions of their source. The fibers and cells of the body are built up by these energies. Therefore, the quality as well as the structures of the cells must correspond with the nature of the creative energies at the time. These energies build cells just like the patterns before them, and the patterns are formed by the subjective conceptions. When that part of the subjective mind that governs cell structures in the body becomes imbued with a more perfect idea of construction, the creative energies will build more perfect cells. And when that part of the subjective mind that governs physical shape and form receives a better conception of shape and form, these creative energies will naturally build a body that is more perfect as to shape and form. Every function in the body is governed by a certain part of the subjective mind, and the creative energies act through that particular function according to the present state of the subjective mind. Therefore, when more perfect patterns are placed in those parts of the subjective that govern the body, the creative energies will build a more perfect body. And when we know that these creative energies are building us a new body every year, according to the predominating pattern of the subjective, we can see how easily the new body we receive every year can be made more perfect if we will improve the subjective pattern. The creative energies construct brain cells in the same way, the quality being governed by the state of mind. And that part of the brain that is to receive the largest group of cells is determined by the tendencies of the mind. In the world of talents and faculties, the creative energies construct concepts so that every talent is actually composed of all the conceptions that the mind has formed while trying to understand the nature and possibility of that talent. In the formation of character, the creative energies do their work in constructing desires, motives, purposes and the like. And in every instance, they form these characteristics according to the predominating thought on the subject. In the construction of the spiritual attitudes and higher attainments the process is very similar, though in these instances the pattern is gained through faith instead of subjective mentation. Why man grows into the likeness of that which he thinks of the most becomes perfectly clear when we understand how the creative energies work, that is, that they always create after the likeness of the subjective pattern. And when we learn that the subjective pattern can be changed in any part of mind by thinking a great deal of a higher conception of that particular phase, we have the whole secret. When we think a great deal along any line with a higher conception before us, we finally establish that higher conception in the place of the old one. When we hold an idea in mind a long time, that idea will become a predominating idea, it will become larger and stronger than the other ideas and will consequently be selected as a model by the creative energies. The next question before us is how to think only of those things that we desire to grow into the likeness of. And this question is answered through the following metaphysical law: man thinks the most both consciously and unconsciously of that which he loves the best. The simplest way to govern thought is to do so through love. When we love the lofty and the noble, we naturally think a great deal of those qualities without trying to do so, and in consequence we become more noble in thought, character and motives. If we wish to develop the greater and the higher within us, we must love everything that contains greatness, and our love must be with the whole heart. That is, every fiber of our being must actually thrill with a passion for that higher something which we desire to develop. Here we must remember that all intellectual or metaphysical methods for the development of talents or character, or anything of a superior nature within us, will fail unless we passionately love superior attainments. The man who loves honesty, justice and virtue will become honest, just and virtuous, though if he does not naturally love those things, no amount of moral training can change his character. Millions of people are praying to become better, more noble and more spiritual, but too many fail to receive answers to such prayers. And the reason why is found in the fact that they do not love as deeply as they should those superior attainments for which they are praying. They may desire those things in a superficial way, but that is not sufficient. Real love alone will avail, because such love goes to the very depth of life and touches the very essence of being itself. When we, as a race, will begin to love the superior and the divine with the same depth that we love gold or material pleasures, we shall become a superior race. When we love divine qualities with the whole heart, we shall think a great deal of such qualities, and the more we will try to understand the inner nature of those qualities. The higher this understanding becomes, the higher will our conception of the divine and the spiritual become. And the higher those conceptions are, the higher will be our thoughts. And since the outer man is fashioned after the ruling thoughts of his mind, we shall in this way steadily rise in the scale of life until we become in mind and personality like those higher thoughts we have learned to think. In other words, we shall manifest in the without more and more of the divinity that is within. And that such a process would in time transform humanity into a superior race anyone can readily understand. Love, however, is not mere sentiment, nor is it ordinary emotionalism. Love also has quality. There is ordinary love and there are the higher forms of quality. Therefore, the love with which we love must be developed into greater worth if we are to penetrate the realms of worth through our love. The reason why we naturally think the most about what we like the best is found in the fact that there can be no division in love. When you actually love something, that something will receive your undivided attention. And as all your thought goes where your attention is directed, you will in this manner give all your thought both consciously and unconsciously to that which you love. This we all know from our own personal experience, and we shall find that everybody has had the same experience, thus proving universally the absoluteness of this law. We have all seen people become beautiful in countenance and character after they had begun to love some high and noble purpose. And we can find thousands who have become more and more common because they have continued to love the ordinary. By living the ordinary they naturally became like the ordinary, thus their mental actions became inferior, and both mind and personality became inferior in proportion. The elements of the body may be in a low state of action and express grossness, or they may be in a high state of action and express refinement, and the state of the mind determines what those actions are to be, whether they are to be crude or refined. The low, common mind invariably gives sluggish or crude actions to the system, and in such a person the physical form looks very much like ordinary clay. But a lofty mind, a mind that is living in the ideal and the beautiful, and in the realization of the marvelous possibilities of mind, gives highly refined actions to the body, and such a body will naturally be superior in fineness, quality and substance. It is therefore true that there are people who are made of a finer clay, not because they have come from so-called noble ancestors, but because their thoughts have become beautiful, lofty and high. The attitude of love towards all that is superior should be cultivated with the greatest enthusiasm, and the love itself should also be made superior as we advance in the realization of true worth. It is in this way that we shall find the true path and the simple path to high thinking, noble thinking and right thinking. And man grows into the likeness, steadily and surely, of that which he thinks of the most. Since we think the most of what we love the best, we should love passionately all that is beautiful and sublime, we should love all that is lofty and ideal, we should love the true side, the superior side and the genuine side in all persons and in all things. But we should never think of the inferior at any time. We should love the perfect, the divine and the spiritual in every soul in existence, and give the whole heart to the love of the sublime qualities of the Supreme. Thus, we shall find that body, mind and soul will respond to the perfect thought that we thus form while living on the mental heights. Gradually we shall find all the elements of our nature changing for the better, becoming more and more like those sublime states of mind, of which we are so vividly conscious while on the heights. Chapter 6, How Mental Pictures Become Realities. Every thought is patterned after the mental image that predominates at the time the thought is created. This is another great metaphysical law, and its importance is found in the fact that thoughts are things, that every thought produces an effect on mind and body, and that the effect is always similar to the cause. According to these facts we can therefore produce any effect desired upon mind or body by producing the necessary thought or mental state, so that when we have learned to control our thinking, we can control practically everything else in life, because in the last analysis it is thinking that constitutes the one great cause in the life of the individual. To control thinking, however, we must understand the process of thought creation. To think is to create thought, and to control thinking is to create any thought we like at any time and under any circumstance. When we analyze the process of thinking we find three factors involved. That is, the pattern, the mental substance and the creative energy. The pattern is always the deepest impression, the clearest image, or the predominating idea. The quality of the mental substance improves with the quality of the mind, and the quantity increases with the expansion of consciousness, while the creative energies grow stronger the less energy we lose and the more we awaken the greater powers from within. When an idea or image is impressed upon the mind, the mental energies will proceed to create thought just like that image, and will continue while that image occupies a permanent position in consciousness. When the mind is very active, a great deal of thought is created every second, though the amount varies with the activity of the mind. It is therefore more detrimental for an active mind to think wrong thought than for a mind that is dull or stupid, proving the fact that responsibility always increases as we rise in the scale. It is the function of the creative energies of the mind to create thought that is just like every image impressed upon mind and to continue to create thought in the likeness of that image while it lasts. The creative energies do this of their own accord and we cannot stop them. But we can make them weak or strong or give them better patterns. Mind is an art gallery of many pictures, but only the most prominent are selected for models and thought creation. Only those pictures that are sufficiently distinct to be seen by consciousness without special effort are brought before the creative energies as patterns. We thus find that the art of controlling one's thinking and the power to determine what kind of thought is to be created is acquired largely through the training of the mind to impress deeply only such mental pictures as are desired as models for thinking. The law, however, is very simple because as the picture in the mind happens to be at this moment, so will also be the thoughts created at this moment, and the mental pictures are in each case the ideas and impressions that we permit in mind. Whatever enters the mind through the senses can impress the mind, and the result will be a picture or mental image which will become a pattern for the creative energies. What takes shape and form in your mind through your own interior thinking will also impress the mind and become an image or pattern. It is therefore possible through this law to determine what kind of thoughts you are to create by impressing your mind with your own ideas regardless of what environment may suggest to you through your senses. And it is by exercising this power that you place the destiny of body, mind and soul absolutely in your own hands. As we proceed with this process, we find another vital law which may be stated as follows: what we constantly picture upon the mind we shall eventually realize in actual life. This law may be spoken of as a twin sister to the one stated above, as they are found to work together in almost every process of thought creation and thought expression. The one declares that all thought is patterned after the predominating mental pictures, while the other declares that the entire external life of man is being daily recreated in the likeness of those mental pictures. The fact is, as the mental tendencies are, so is thought; as thought is, so is character, and it is the combined action of character, ability and purpose that determines what we are to attain or accomplish, or what is to happen to us. Through the law of attraction, we naturally meet in the external world what corresponds to our own internal world, that is, to what we are in ourselves. The self constitutes the magnet, and like attracts like. This self which constitutes the magnet is composed of all the active forces, desires, tendencies, motives, states and thoughts that are at work in mind or personality. When we look at everything that is alive throughout our whole being and put all those things together, we have what may be termed our present active self. And this self invariably attracts in the external world such conditions as correspond to its own nature. This self and all its parts in the person correspond to the thoughts that we have been creating in mind. In fact, the nature of the self is actually composed of thought, mental states and mental activities. We realize, therefore, that when we change our thought, the nature of the self will change, and this change will be good or otherwise depending upon the change of thought. Your external life is the exact counterpart of this active self. This self is the exact likeness of your thought, and your thoughts are patterned after the pictures that are impressed upon your mind. Therefore, we understand that whatever is pictured in the mind will be realized in external life. And the reason why is not only simply explained but can be proven along strictly scientific lines. However, to determine through the law of mind picturing what our external life is to be, every process of mind picturing which we desire to carry out must be continued for a sufficient length of time to give the creative processes the opportunity to make over the whole self. When a certain picture is formed in the mind, thought will be created in the likeness of that picture. This thought goes out and permeates the entire self and changes the self to a degree. But as a rule, it takes some time to change the entire self. Therefore, we must continue to hold the desired picture in mind until the whole self has been entirely made over and has become just like the ideal picture. And you can easily discern when the self has been wholly changed, because as soon as the self is changed, everything in your life changes. Then a new self will attract new people, new conditions, new environments, new opportunities and new states of being. It is evident therefore that so long as there is no change in the outer life, we may know that the self has not been changed. However, the changing process may be going on, but the new has not as yet become stronger than the old, and for the time being things continue as they were. When the self has been changed to such an extent that the new becomes positive and the old negative, we will begin to attract new things. We may therefore begin to attract new and better things for some time before the entire self has been completely changed. When we are changing only a part of the self, that part will begin to attract the new, while those parts of the self that have not been changed will continue to attract the old as usual. This explains why some people continue to attract trouble and adversity for a while after they have begun to live a larger and a better life. In promoting the art of mind picturing, we must not change ideas or plans at too frequent intervals, for such changes will neutralize what has been gained thus far, and here is the place where a great many people fail. The average person who wishes to change his life for the better does not hold on to his ideals long enough, that is, he does not give them a fair chance to work themselves out and bring the expected results. When he does not receive results as soon as he expects, he changes his plans and produces new pictures upon the mind. Thus, he begins all over again, losing what he had built up through previous plans, but ere long becomes discouraged once more, so tries still other ideas or methods. When our ideals are the highest, we know we do not have to change them. They cannot be improved upon until we have so entirely recreated ourselves that we can live in a superior state of consciousness. It is therefore highly important to determine positively upon the ideals that we wish to realize, and to hold on to those ideals until they are realized regardless of what may happen in the meantime. However, we must not infer that we can realize in the external the correspondence of every picture that we hold in mind, because the majority of the mental pictures that we form are so constituted that they can be worked out in practical action. We must therefore distinguish between such ideals as can be made practical now and those that are simply temporary dreams, having no connection with real life here and now. To be realized, a mental picture must be constant, but only such pictures can be constant as are sufficiently elaborate to involve a complete transformation in yourself, and that are so high that they can act as an inspiration until all your present ideals are realized. When we form such pictures in the mind and continue to hold on to them until they are externally realized, we shall certainly obtain the desired realization. At such times we can proceed with the perfect faith that what we have pictured will become true in actual life in days to come, and those days will not be far away. But to use this law, the mind must never waver, it must hitch its wagon to a star and never cut the traces. In scientific mind picturing, it is not necessary to go into minor details, though we must not be too general. The idea is to picture all the essentials, that is, all those parts that are distinct or individualized. But we need not include such things as are naturally attracted by the essentials. In other words, apply the law, and that which will naturally come through the application of that law, will be realized. If you wish to realize a more perfect body, it is not necessary to picture the exact physical appearance of that body. You may not know at present what a perfect body should look like. Therefore, picture only the quality of perfection in every part of the physical form, and those qualities will develop and express themselves more and more throughout your personality. And if you wish to enter a different environment, do not give your thought to some special locality, nor to persons and things that would necessarily be included in such an environment. Persons come and go, and things are generally the way we wish them to be. To proceed, realize what constitutes an ideal environment and hold that picture in your mind. In analyzing an ideal environment, we would find it to contain harmony, beauty, love, peace, joy, desirable opportunities, advantages, ideal friends, wholesome conditions, and an abundance of the best of everything that the welfare of human life may require. Therefore, we should picture those things and continue to hold them in mind with the faith that we will soon find an environment containing all those things in the highest degree of perfection. Gradually we shall find more and more of them coming into our life until we shall find an environment that comes up in every respect to our ideal. The law of mind picturing will also be found effective in changing physical conditions. Any physical malady must eventually disappear if we continue to hold in mind a perfect picture of health and wholeness. Many have eliminated chronic ailments in a few weeks and even in a few days by this method, and all would succeed if they never picture disease but perfect health only. In the field of achievement, we will find the same facts to hold good. Whenever we fear that we shall not succeed, we bring forth the wrong picture, thus the wrong thoughts are created and wrong conditions are produced. In consequence, the very thing we feared comes upon us. When we are positively determined to succeed, however, we picture the idea of success and attainment upon the mind, and according to the law, success will be realized in external life. Mental and spiritual attainments respond remarkably to mind picturing, principally because all true mind picturing draws consciousness up into the world of superiority. The same is true in the field of talent. If there is any talent that you wish to develop, draw mental pictures of yourself in full possession of that talent, and you will comply with the requirements of the steady growth of that talent. This method alone will accomplish much, but when it is associated with our processes of development, the results desired will surely be remarkable. In the building of character, mind picturing is of exceptional importance. If you continue to associate only with impure minds and continue to think only of deeds of darkness, you will picture only the wrong upon your mind. Thus, your thoughts will become wrong, and wrong thoughts lead to wrong actions. The contrary, however, is also true. So therefore, if we wish to perfect our conduct, we must impress upon the mind only such ideas as will inspire us with desires and aims for greater and higher things. We all admit that character can be influenced most decidedly by mind pictures, but everybody may not be ready to accept the idea that ability, attainment, achievement, environment, and destiny can be affected in the same way. However, it is only a full analysis of the law of mind picturing that is necessary to prove this also to be an exact scientific fact. It is the way we think that determines the quality of the mind, and it is the quality of the mind that determines what our ability, mental capacity, and mental force is to be. And we can readily understand that the improvement of ability will naturally be followed by increase in attainment and achievement, as well as a greater control over fate and destiny. Man is constantly increasing his ability, is making his own future, and is making that future brighter and greater every day. Therefore, if mind pictures can affect mental quality, mental power, and mental ability, they can also affect environment and achievement, and in brief, the entire external life of man. In looking for evidence for the fact that mental pictures can affect ability, simply compare results from efforts that are inspired by high ideals and efforts that are inspired by low ideals, And you have all the evidence you need. When your mind is filled with pictures of superiority, you will think superior thoughts that have more quality, power and worth, and such thoughts cannot fail to give power, quality and worth to your talents and faculties. We also find that tendencies, desires and motives originate largely from mental pictures, and we also know that these factors exercise an enormous power in life. The active self of man is so dominated by desires and tendencies that it is absolutely impossible to change the self until tendencies and desires are changed. But tendencies and desires as well as motives cannot be changed without changing the mental pictures, a fact of extreme importance. Through scientific mind picturing you can create or eliminate any kind of desire, you can produce or remove any tendency that you like. All that is necessary is to impress upon the mind the perfect picture of a desire or tendency that you wish and then continue to hold that picture in the mind until you have results. A mental picture, however, is not necessarily something that you can see in the same way as you see external, tangible things. It is an impression or idea or concept and is seen only by the understanding. In order to hold a mental picture constantly in mind, keep all the essentials of that picture before your attention, that is, try to be conscious of the real nature of those powers and possibilities that are represented by the picture. In other words, enter into the very nature of those qualities which that picture represents. The mind is very large. It is therefore possible to form mental pictures of as many ideals as we like, but at first it is best to choose only a few. Begin by picturing a perfect body, an able mind, a strong character and a beautiful soul, after that an ideal interior life and an ideal external environment. Thus, you have the foundation of a great life, a rich life and a wonderful life. Keep these pictures constantly before your mind. In fact, train yourself to actually live for those pictures. And you will find all things in your life changing daily to become more and more like those pictures. In the course of time, you will realize in actual life the exact likeness of those pictures, that is, what you have constantly pictured upon your mind you will realize in actual life. Then you can form new and more beautiful pictures to be realized in like manner as you build for a still greater future. Chapter 7. The increase of mental power. All mental actions that consciously move towards the within tend to increase the capacity, the power and the quality of mind. The majority of mental actions in the average mind, however, move towards the surface, and this is one reason why advancing years bring mental inferiority, as the converse of this law is also true. That is, that all mental actions that move towards the surface will decrease the power of mind. According to the law of growth, the more we use a faculty, the larger and stronger and more perfect it should become, provided it is used properly. Therefore, continuous use in itself should invariably bring increase. However, the use of anything may follow the lines of destruction as well as construction. For this reason, we must train all mental actions along constructive lines. And we find all constructive action tends to deepen mental action, in other words, tends to move towards the within. The value of the increase of mental power is clearly evident along all lines. Everything must increase in the life of him who is perpetually increasing his own personal power. We know that a large mind creates more extensively than a small one. The creations of a highly developed mind are more worthy than the creations of an inferior mind, and the achievements of any one are in proportion to that one's capacity and power. Therefore, when we begin to increase the value of life, everything pertaining to life as well as everything coming into life will increase also. Perpetual development in ourselves means perpetual increase of everything of worth required in our sphere of existence. This is the law, but so long as mental actions move towards the surface, mentality is diminished, therefore, the opposite process must be established. By training all mental actions to move constantly towards the within, we increase perpetually the capacity, the power and the quality of mind, and the reason why is very simple. When mental actions move towards the surface, consciousness will be centered upon the surface of things and will therefore picture in mind the lesser and inferior side of things. Those mental energies that serve as patterns for the creative energies will in consequence be formed in the likeness of the smaller. And the result is that the mind will be created according to the lesser and more inferior conception of itself. On the other hand, when all the actions of mind move toward the great within, the eye of the mind will concentrate upon the world of greater possibilities. The conception of things will in such a mental state constantly increase because attention at such times is concerned only with that which is larger and superior. Thus, the mental energies will be directed towards the idea of superiority, and the creative energies will naturally rebuild the mind gradually and steadily upon a larger and more perfect scale. This is all very simple, and anyone who will examine the workings of his own mind will find it to be absolutely true. We understand therefore how each individual has in his own hands the power to create for himself a greater mind, a more perfect personality, a richer life and a more desirable destiny. In all methods for mental development, this law must be wisely considered, for no matter how perfect the method may be, if the mental actions move towards the surface, no results will be gained. While on the other hand, if the mental actions move towards the within, results will positively be gained even though the methods be inferior. Nearly all minds in the past that continue to develop through life did so without system, but gained increase through aspiration, or rather concentration upon the greater possibilities of life, which in turn caused mental actions to move towards the within. When your attention is turned upon the inner and the larger phases of life, your mind will begin to turn its actions upon the great within. Accordingly, all mental tendencies will begin to move towards superiority, and all the building forces in your life will have superiority as their goal. That you should constantly rise in the scale when thinking and acting in this manner is therefore evident. Remarkable results have been gained and can be gained simply through aspiration, but if a complete system of the best methods is employed in conjunction with the fundamental law, these results will naturally increase to a very great degree. For this reason, all things that are conducive to the growth of the mind should be employed in harmony so that the increase of mental power may be gained in the largest possible measure. To train the mental actions to move towards the within, we should concentrate attention upon the greater possibilities of life and think as deeply and as much as we can upon those possibilities. In fact, we should train the mind to look towards the within at all times and view with great expectations those superior states that ere long will be attained. In addition, all tendencies of life should be trained to move towards the higher and the larger, and every thought should have an ascending spirit. When you feel that you are becoming too much concerned with the superficial, turn attention at once upon the depths of existence. And when you feel that you have fallen down temporarily into the world of inferiority, use every effort at your command to rise again towards the heights. The leading purpose should be to train all the forces, desires, tendencies and actions in life to move upward and onward at all times. This will cause the greater powers and possibilities within to be awakened, which will be followed by the perpetual increase of the capacity, the power and the quality of the mind. And with this increase comes also the increase of everything else in life that is required for our highest welfare. When this increase of power begins, it will naturally be felt in various parts of mind, and in order to know how to make the best possible use of this increase, as well as of the power we already possess, we should remember the great law, that whatever you feel that you can do, that you have the power to do. There are many methods through which we can determine what the mind really can do and what work we may be able to carry out successfully, but this particular law is the best guide of all, provided it is properly understood. And it is extremely important to discover what we are able to do, because the majority are not in their true spheres of action. To be in your true sphere of action means better work, greater results and more abundant good both to yourself and to others with whom you are associated. It also means that you can be at your best at all times, and he who is at his best at all times is on the way to perpetual growth and perpetual increase. To do your best work and your true work, you must employ the largest and the strongest faculty that you possess. But to learn what this faculty actually is, this is the problem. This problem can be solved, however, if we live in compliance with the law just mentioned. The power that we possess is always felt. Therefore, when you feel that you can do a certain thing, it means that there is sufficient power in that particular faculty that is required. But a faculty must be large before it can contain enough power to be consciously felt. Consequently, the fact that you feel power in a certain faculty proves conclusively that that faculty is large and is possessed of considerable ability. From this point on, the question to decide is, where you feel the greatest amount of power, because where you feel the most power, there you will find the greatest ability. This is conclusive, but here another question arises. That is, if the feeling of the average person is always reliable. The answer is that it is not. But it can be made so with a little training. All psychologists have come to the conclusion that there is but one sense, the sense of feeling, and that all other senses, both in the external and the internal, are but modifications of this one sense. It is also admitted that the sense of feeling can be cultivated along scores of lines where it is now wholly inactive, and that there is no perceptible limit to its development along any line. This being true, we shall go to the very foundation of all the senses, and all the modes of discerning things, when we take the sense of feeling for our guide in the selection of that work for which we have the greatest talent and power. To train the sense of feeling in detecting the exact place in mind where the greatest power resides, the first step is to make this sense normal, which is highly important because the average person has so many artificial desires and permits the mind to be stimulated by every successful venture that is heard of. There are a great many people who become aroused with ambition to enter the literary world whenever they learn of remarkable success attained in that world. Thus, their energies are temporarily turned upon the literary faculties and they feel considerable power in that part of the mind. This they think is sufficient evidence that they have literary talent and make attempts to get results in such work, but they soon find that the inspiration in that direction did not last and they are compelled to try something else. Then these people may learn of remarkable success in the business world. They become enthused over the possibilities of commercial ventures and turn their energies in that direction. But they soon find that their commercial faculties are not large enough to carry out their ambitions along this line. In consequence, they turn their attention to the next venture that looks promising. There are thousands of minds who are constantly affected in this way, drifting from one thing to another. They imagine that because someone is succeeding in a certain work, they may also succeed in that work, provided they have inclinations along that line. They also imagine that they are the very ones to enter every particular field where the demand for great service and great ability is required. The reason is their minds are controlled by appearances and what they feel is the result of the switching of energy here and there from one faculty to another. Such people therefore cannot rely upon the sense of feeling in any line of action because it is seldom normal. To produce a normal sense of feeling for the purpose in question, we should never pay any attention to what others have done or are doing, because the success of others proves nothing as far as we are concerned. We must not look at the power of another man's brain but try to find what there is in our own brains. We should never permit the enthusiasm of others to intoxicate our own minds. We should let others be enthused in their way, and we should let them concentrate upon what work they like. But we should not imitate others either in thought, enthusiasm or feeling. The course to pursue is to watch yourself closely for some weeks or months and try to discover in what faculty you feel the most power. If you feel the greatest power in a certain faculty and in that one only, you may choose that faculty without further examination and give it all your force, energy, ambition and desire, realizing that the application of that faculty will bring the greatest results that you could attain in your life. But if there are several other faculties that seem to be equally strong, wait and watch more closely until you finally discover the seat of the greatest power. When two or more seem to be equally strong, and continue thus under the most rigid self-examination, choose the one that you can use to the best advantage now, and turn all your power for attainment and achievement in the direction. When there is prolonged uncertainty as to where the greatest amount of power is expressed, try to increase the power of every part of your mind by directing the subconscious to express more power from within. The value of this is found in the fact that the greatest amount of power always goes to the largest faculty, so that an increase of power will in every case reveal the existence of the leading talent or faculty in your possession. After you have made the sense of feeling normal so that you can feel the state of your mind as it really is, you can always depend upon the law that whatever you feel that you can do, you have the power to do. And you may proceed to act along that line knowing that you will succeed, no matter how difficult the undertaking may seem to be. It is the presence of great power in a certain faculty that makes you feel that you can do things by using that faculty. Therefore, when you can feel what faculty is the largest and strongest, you know positively what you can do, what you can accomplish and what you should undertake. True, a great deal of training of that strongest faculty may be required, but since the talent, the ability, and the power are there, the results must follow when the practical application is made. May the force be with you. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for next part of the